The dust-laden winds of Wyoming territory in 1875 carried the muffled sobs of 8-year-old Tommy Allen as he clutched his sister's hand. Both of them huddled beneath the lone oak tree that marked their parents' fresh graves. Abigail Allen stood rigid, her 16-year-old frame seeming to age a decade in the week since the fever had taken both their mother and father, leaving them alone on their failing homestead with winter approaching and nothing but uncertainty ahead. "I promise I'll take care of you, Tommy," Abigail whispered, her voice cracking as she squeezed her brother's small hand. At 18, she should have been dreaming of suitors and dances, but instead found herself the sole guardian of a frightened child in a merciless land. "How?" Tommy's voice was small, his eyes red-rimmed as he looked up at his sister. "Pa said the bank's gonna take our farm. Where will we go, Abby?" Before she could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A tall figure on horseback emerged from the shimmering heat waves that danced across the plains. The stranger's silhouette grew larger as he approached, his broad-shouldered frame casting a long shadow that stretched toward the siblings. Abigail instinctively pulled Tommy behind her, squaring her shoulders despite the fear coursing through her veins. They had little left to steal, but she'd heard stories of bandits and desperados who took more than just possessions. The rider slowed his chestnut mare to a stop several yards from the graves. Dust swirled around him as he dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat respectfully as he approached. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held kindness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. "Miss Allen," his voice was deep, gentle. "I'm Declan Reid. I worked with your father last spring on the cattle drive to Cheyenne." Abigail studied him cautiously. He stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, and the gun at his hip looked well-maintained, the mark of a man who knew how to survive but wasn't eager to prove it. "Mr. Reid," she nodded stiffly. "I'm afraid you've come at a poor time. Our parents are just laid to rest." His eyes softened as he glanced at the fresh mounds of earth. "That's why I'm here, Miss Allen. Word reached the ranch where I've been working. Your father was a good man. He saved my life once when we got caught in that flash flood outside of Laramie." Tommy peered around his sister's skirts, studying the stranger with wary curiosity. "This is my brother, Thomas," Abigail said, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. Declan crouched down to Tommy's level, his movements slow and deliberate. "Hello, Thomas." "That's a fine name for a young man." Tommy didn't respond, just gripped his sister's skirt tighter. "What do you want, Mr. Reid?" Abigail asked, her voice tinged with exhaustion. Declan stood back up, dusting off his knee. "I heard about your situation. The foreman at the Triple R sent me to offer you a position. We need someone to help with cooking and laundry for the hands. There's a small cabin near the main house that would be yours. The boy would be welcome too." Hope flared briefly in Abigail's chest before suspicion dampened it. "Why would your foreman offer such charity to strangers?" "It's not charity, Miss Allen. It's a paying job, and we're short-handed since Mrs. Peterson left to care for her ailing mother in Denver. As for why you specifically..." He paused. "Your father talked about you and your brother often. He was proud of your skills, said you could cook better than most hotel chefs in Cheyenne." A small, sad smile touched Abigail's lips. Her father had always boasted about her cooking, even when it was just simple fare. "The bank is for closing next week," she admitted. "We have nowhere to go." Tommy looked up at her, fear evident in his eyes. "Are we going to be separate, Abby? Like the Wilson children?" Abigail's heart clenched. The Wilson orphans had been split up among different families after their parents died in a wagon accident last year. She knelt down and took Tommy's face in her hands. "No, Tommy, we stay together, always." Declan watched the exchange, his expression solemn. "The offer includes both of you, I give you my word." "Your word means little to me, Mr. Reid." "I've known you all of 5 minutes," Abigail replied, though there was less edge to her voice now. "Fair enough," he nodded. But I knew your father and I owe him. Let me repay that debt by helping his children." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the graves, Abigail weighed their options. They had little money, fewer prospects, and winter was coming. The Triple R was one of the largest cattle operations in the territory, stable and well established. When would we need to leave? She asked finally. "Tomorrow would be best. I can help you pack whatever you want to bring." He hesitated, then added, "The bank may take the land, but your personal belongings are yours to keep." That night, after Tommy had finally fallen asleep in the small bed they now shared, Abigail sat by the window, watching moonlight silver the plains outside. The decision had been made they would go with Declan Reid to the Triple R Ranch. Whether it was the right choice, only time would tell. Dawn broke cold and clear the next morning. Declan arrived with a wagon borrowed from a neighboring farm. He worked quietly alongside Abigail, loading their most precious possessions, their mother's china, their father's books, clothing, and the family Bible with generations of names inscribed inside. Tommy stood in the doorway of the only home he'd ever known, clutching a wooden horse his father had carved for him last Christmas. "You ready, partner?" Declan asked gently, approaching the boy. Tommy shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. Declan crouched down again, meeting the boy's gaze. "I know this is hard. I lost my folks when I was not much older than you. It feels like the whole world's ending." "Did you have a sister?" Tommy asked quietly. "No," Declan replied honestly. "I was all alone. That's why I'm glad you have Abigail. And now you've got me too, for whatever that's worth." Tommy studied him with those serious eyes that seemed too old for his young face. "Will we ever come back here?" Declan didn't sugarcoat it. "I don't know, son, but you'll carry this place with you, right here." He tapped his own chest. "Just like I carry my home." When Abigail approached, wiping her hands on her apron, she was surprised to see Tommy hand Declan his wooden horse to carry to the wagon, a small gesture of trust that brought tears to her eyes. The journey to the Triple R took most of the day. As they traveled, Declan pointed out landmarks and told stories that occasionally coaxed small smiles from Tommy. Abigail remained quiet, absorbing the changing landscape and wondering what awaited them. The Triple R spread out across the valley like a small kingdom. The main house stood proudly on a gentle rise, with a bunkhouse, barn, and various outbuildings clustered nearby. Several smaller cabins dotted the property, including the one that would be theirs, a modest but sturdy structure with a small porch and chimney. "It's not much," Declan said as he helped them unload their belongings, "but it's solid and it'll keep you warm in winter." The cabin was clean inside with 2 small bedrooms, a main room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen area with a cast iron stove. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the table, a welcoming touch that made Abigail's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. That evening, Mrs. Ramsey, the foreman's wife, came by with a hot meal and a genuine smile. "You rest tonight," she insisted. "Tomorrow's soon enough to start work." After Tommy went to bed, exhausted from the day's journey, Abigail stepped onto the porch where Declan was splitting kindling for their fire. "Why are you really helping us?" she asked bluntly. "And don't tell me it's just because of my father." Declan set down the axe and straightened, moonlight silvering his features. "Your father was part of it," he admitted. "But truth be told, I know what it's like to be alone in this world. When I heard about you too," he paused, searching for words. "No one should have to face that kind of loss without help. So it's pity," she concluded, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "No, madam, it's humanity, something this territory could use more of." He picked up the kindling he'd split. "Will you accept it?" After a long moment, Abigail nodded, stepping aside to let him bring the wood inside. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Abigail rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. She learned the kitchen routines from Mrs. Ramsey, who proved to be a patient teacher and eventual friend. Afternoons were spent doing laundry, mending, and preparing the evening meal. while Tommy was allowed to shadow the ranch hand assigned to teach him his letters and numbers Declan had arranged for his education to continue. Declan himself was often away, working cattle or riding the boundaries of the ranch's vast acreage. But whenever he returned, he always made time to check on the Allens, bringing small gifts, a book for Tommy, wildflowers for Abigail, news from town. As autumn deepened into winter, Abigail found herself watching for his return, a fact she was reluctant to admit even to herself. Tommy, on the other hand, made no secret of his growing attachment to the cowboy. He would run to meet Declan whenever he spotted him riding in, bombarding him with questions about his day. One evening in early December, as snow fell softly outside, Declan arrived at their cabin with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle. "Christmas is coming," he explained to Tommy's wide-eyed delight. "Thought you might like to decorate it like your ma used to do." Abigail watched from the doorway as Declan helped Tommy set up the tree in the corner of their main room. The simple kindness of the gesture made her heart ache in a way that wasn't entirely painful. Later, after Tommy had gone to bed, still chattering about the Christmas tree, Abigail found herself alone with Declan by the fire. "Thank you," she said softly. "I hadn't thought about how to make Christmas special for him." "You've had a lot on your mind," Declan replied, his voice equally quiet. "You're doing an amazing job with him, Abigail. Your parents would be proud." She felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing him. He needs more than just me." "You're not alone anymore," Declan said, his eyes catching the firelight. "Either of you." Something in his tone made her look up, really look at him. The intensity in his gaze caught her off guard. "I should go," he said, standing abruptly. "Early start tomorrow." Abigail nodded, walking him to the door. "Good night, Declan." He paused on the threshold, seeming about to say something more, then simply tipped his hat. "Good night, Abigail." As winter tightened its grip on the territory, life at the Triple R settled into a comfortable routine. Tommy was flourishing under the attention of the ranch hands, who treated him like a mascot, teaching him to ride and care for the horses when his chores and lessons were complete. Abigail's cooking had won her praise from even the most taciturn cowboys, and she found herself enjoying the sense of purpose her work provided. The first real crisis came during a blizzard in January. Tommy had been helping in the barn when the storm hit suddenly, cutting visibility to almost nothing. When he didn't return to the cabin as the wind rose to a howl, Abigail felt panic claw at her throat. She was pulling on her coat to search for him when the door burst open, bringing a swirl of snow and Declan with Tommy bundled in his coat. "Found him trying to make it back from the barn," Declan explained, setting the boy down near the fire. "Smart enough to stay put when he realized he couldn't see the way, but it's bitter cold out there." Tommy's face was pale, his lips blue-tinged. Abigail worked quickly to remove his wet clothes and wrap him in blankets while Declan built up the fire. "You scared me half to death," she scolded gently, rubbing Tommy's hands between hers to warm them. "I'm sorry, Abby," Tommy whispered, his teeth chattering. "I just wanted to make sure Pepper's stall was closed proper." "Pepper," Declan raised an eyebrow. "The new foal," Tommy explained. "She's my favorite." Declan smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Well, Cowboy, next time you check on your horse, make sure you check the weather too." The blizzard raged for 2 days, forcing Declan to stay at their cabin rather than risk the journey back to the bunkhouse. He slept on a pallet by the fire, told stories to entertain Tommy during the long hours of confinement, and helped Abigail with chores that normally would have been hers alone. On the third morning, Abigail woke to find Declan teaching Tommy how to play checkers at the kitchen table. Both of them so absorbed in the game they didn't notice her watching from the bedroom doorway. The domesticity of the scene made her heart twist with longing for something she hadn't allowed herself to want. As spring began to soften the land, changes came to the Triple R. The foreman's wife fell ill, requiring more of Abigail's time in the main house. Cattle drives took Declan away for weeks at a time, and Tommy began spending more time with the young cowhand who'd been teaching him his letters, now teaching him the basics of ranch work. When Declan returned from the first drive of the season, dusty and trail-worn, Abigail felt a surge of something more than relief at seeing him safe. Their eyes met across the yard as he dismounted, and the smile that broke across his face sent warmth flooding through her veins. That evening he came to their cabin with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Something for you," he said, handing it to Abigail. Inside was a book of poetry Tennyson, his leather binding worn but the pages clean and crisp. "I remembered you mentioning how much you missed your father's books," he explained, suddenly seeming almost shy. "Found this in Cheyenne. It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the embossed cover. "Thank you, Declan." "There's a dance in town next Saturday," he said, the words coming quickly as if he'd rehearsed them. "Thought maybe you might like to go. Mrs. Ramsey said she'd watch Tommy." Abigail looked up, surprised. "Are you asking to court me, Mr. Reid?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I believe I am, Miss Allen, if you'll have me." The town dance was held in the newly constructed schoolhouse, decorated with paper streamers and lit by lanterns that cast a warm glow over the wooden floor. Abigail wore her best dress, a blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, with her hair arranged in a style she hadn't attempted since before her parents died. When Declan arrived to escort her, dressed in clean clothes with his hair slicked back, the look of appreciation in his eyes made her blush like a schoolgirl. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. They rode to town in a buggy borrowed from the ranch, the spring evening mild and fragrant with wildflowers. Abigail found herself relaxing in his company, laughing at his stories and sharing some of her own from before her parents' deaths. At the dance, Declan proved to be surprisingly light on his feet for such a large man. He guided her through waltzes and reels with confidence, his hand warm and steady at her waist. "Where did a cowboy learn to dance like this?" she asked during a brief rest. "My mother," he replied, a shadow of old grief passing across his face. "She was determined I'd be a gentleman even if I chose to work cattle for a living. She succeeded," Abigail said softly. As they drove home under a canopy of stars, Declan pulled the buggy to a stop on a rise overlooking the Triple R. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low in the darkness, "about the future." Abigail's heart quickened. "Oh, I've been saving," he continued. "Have a fair amount put by. Enough to buy a small spread of my own, maybe, build something lasting." She waited, hardly daring to breathe. "But I don't want to build it alone." He turned to face her, taking her hand in his. "Abigail, I know it hasn't been that long, but I think I've been falling in love with you since the day I saw you standing so brave by your parents' graves." Tears pricked at her eyes, but they were happy tears. And Tommy, Declan's smile was tender in the moonlight. "That boy's worked his way into my heart too. I'd be proud to help raise him, to be a father to him if he'll have me." "He adores you," she whispered, "and so do I." When he kissed her, it felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar and new all at once. Summer brought change to the Triple R. Declan proposed properly, with a small gold ring he'd purchased in Cheyenne. They were married in the town church, with Tommy proudly standing as Declan's best man and the entire ranch turning out to celebrate. With his savings, and a loan from the bank backed by the Triple Artique's owner who thought highly of him, Declan purchased a modest property adjoining the Triple R. It came with a small but solid house that needed some work, good grazing land, and potential that made his eyes light up when he talked about it. "The Reid Ranch," Tommy said approvingly when they first visited it. "Can I have my own horse?" "We'll see about that," Abigail laughed, her heart full as she watched her brother race across what would be their new home. Later, as they stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold, Declan slipped his arm around her waist. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "When my parents died, I thought that was the end of everything. I never imagined." "Life has a way of surprising us," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. That night, after Tommy was asleep in what would be his new room, they sat together on the porch of what would soon be their home. "I was thinking," Declan said, his voice thoughtful in the darkness. "Maybe we should consider making this family bigger someday." Abigail leaned her head against his shoulder, smiling. "I'd like that. Tommy would make a wonderful big brother." "He would indeed," Declan agreed. "And you're an amazing mother to him already." "I'm his sister," she corrected gently. "You're both," Declan insisted. "You've been mother and sister and protector, all rolled into one. It's one of the many reasons I love you." As the years passed, the Reid ranch prospered. Declan's knowledge of cattle and Abigail's careful management of their resources helped them weather the unpredictable economy of the territory. Tommy grew into a fine young man, tall like Declan, with his sister's kind heart and their father's skill with horses. Their family expanded too, with the arrival of a daughter they named Sarah after Abigail's mother, and later, a son they called Michael. The house grew along with the family additions built by Declan's hands, a larger kitchen for Abigail, bedrooms for the children. On Tommy's 16th birthday, Declan presented him with papers making him a full partner in the ranch. "It'll be yours and your siblings someday," he explained. "But you've earned your place now." The boy, nearly a man now, had hugged him fiercely, words failing him. Later that night, after the celebration was over and the younger children were asleep, Tommy sought out his sister on the porch where she sat with Declan, enjoying the cool evening air. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice deeper now than when they'd first come to the Triple R. "About changing my name." Abigail felt a pang of concern. "Your name, not Thomas," he clarified quickly. "I want to keep that, but I was thinking." He took a deep breath. "I'd like to be Thomas Reid now, officially, if that's all right." Declan's hand found Abigail's, squeezing gently. "You've been more of a father to me than I can remember our real pa being," Tommy continued, looking at Declan. "And this is our family now. I want the name to match." Abigail felt tears spill down her cheeks as Declan stood and embraced the boy who'd become his son in every way that mattered. "I'd be honored," Declan said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than you know." On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Declan took Abigail for a ride to the spot where he'd first proposed. The land looked different now, more settled, more prosperous, but the view of the mountains remained timeless. "Remember that day I found you and Tommy at your parents' graves?" he asked, helping her down from her horse. She nodded, wondering where his thoughts were leading. "I made him a promise that day," Declan continued, "when you were packing inside the house. He was scared, clinging to that wooden horse, afraid you'd both be separated. What did you promise him?" She asked softly. "I told him you'll never be alone again." Declan's eyes were bright with emotion. "It was a big promise to make, not knowing what the future held, but looking back now, I think it's the one promise I've kept most faithfully." Abigail reached up to touch his face, weathered now by years of sun and wind, but still as dear to her as ever. "You've kept every promise you ever made to us," Declan Reid. As the sun began to set over their land, their home, she thought of the long journey from that desolate day at the gravesite to this moment of contentment. They had built something precious together, not just a ranch or a family, but a sanctuary where love had healed old wounds and created new beginnings. "I love you," she whispered, the words as true now as the first time she'd spoken them. His answering smile was like coming home. "And I love you, Mrs. Reid. Always will." They rode back together as twilight deepened, toward the lights of their house where their children waited, where Tommy, now Thomas, would be helping Sarah with her reading and keeping an eye on young Michael. Toward the future, they'd built from the ashes of loss, one day at a time, with courage and faith and love. And as they approached their home, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that the frightened orphans who had once stood alone at their parents' graves would indeed never be alone again.